They saw a uniform, not a person. A pair of hands to carry their plates, a voice to take their orders, a silhouette to be ignored. In the glittering expanse of the onyx room, a restaurant so exclusive it felt less like a place to eat and more like a vault for the city's elite, Ella Simmons was designed to be invisible. Her crisp white shirt and severe black skirt were a costume of subservience, her hair pulled back in a tight, practical bun that tugged at her scalp. To the patrons of Table 7, she was just another part of the furniture, and furniture does not have feelings. They were wrong. So terribly, life-alteringly wrong. They didn't see the keen intelligence in her hazel eyes, an intelligence that could dissect a corporate balance sheet as easily as it could spot an empty water glass. They didn't know the hands that refilled their champagne flutes had just that morning signed off on a multi-million-dollar philanthropic grant. And they certainly had no idea that the young woman they were about to humiliate for sport was the sole heir to the Simmons global empire, the daughter of the one man in the city even their powerful fathers were afraid of. They were about to throw wine on a waitress. They had no idea they were really dousing a lit fuse connected to a powder keg named Theodore Simmons, and he was only one phone call away. The Tuesday evening service was a controlled storm. The air hummed with the low thrum of money, a symphony of hushed negotiations, discreet flirtations, and the clinking of baccarat crystal. For Ella, it was the third week of her self-imposed exile from a world of privilege. 3 more months, and she would have the data she needed. Table 9 needs the sommelier, Ella. Table 4 is asking about the provenance of the Wagyu. And for God's sake, smile. You look like you're at a funeral. Marcus Doyle, the restaurant's manager, hissed the words as he swept past her, his face a mask of stressed perfection. He was a man who worshipped at the altar of wealth, and his staff were the sacrificial lambs. Yes, Mr. Doyle, Ella murmured, her voice barely a whisper in the opulent chaos. She balanced a heavy silver tray laden with cocktails, the muscles in her forearm taut. In the polished silver, she caught a distorted glimpse of herself. She looked exhausted. The circles under her eyes were darker than the onyx walls. No one here would ever guess that her life was a carefully constructed lie. No one knew that she wasn't working to pay rent on a tiny apartment, but to understand the soul of the service industry. Her father, Theodore Simmons, had built his hotel and restaurant empire from a single diner he inherited from his own father. He always said, "You can't command the ship until you've scrubbed the decks." It was a lesson he'd tried to impart to his executives for years, but one Ella felt she had to live to truly comprehend. She had a vision for a new kind of hospitality, a chain of boutique hotels where the staff were as valued as the guests, where dignity was the ultimate amenity. But to build it, she needed to understand the rot in the foundation of the old model. "I'll give you the capital, Ella," Theodore had boomed from behind his massive mahogany desk a month ago, his voice laced with protective frustration. "A blank check. Build your utopia. You don't need to do this. You're a Simmons." "And what does that mean, Dad?" she had argued, her hands planted on his desk. "That I should be insulated from reality? That I should command people whose lives I can't begin to imagine? I need to know what it feels like to be invisible. I need to understand the system before I can break it." He had reluctantly agreed, on one condition. She had a silent security detail nearby at all times, and a direct line to him if things ever became untenable. He hated it. He hated the thought of his brilliant, Yale-educated daughter being at the beck and call of arrogant socialites. But he admired her grit, the same stubborn fire that had made him a billionaire. Tonight, that fire was being tested. Her section was full, and at the center of it, like a venomous spider in a golden web, was Table 7. Linda Carter sat enthroned in the plush booth, a vision in a shimmering, deep blue dress that plunged daringly low. Diamonds dripped from her neck and wrists, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers and scattering it like shards of ice. She was the daughter of Daniel Carter, a construction magnate whose methods were as crude as his buildings were tall. Flanking her were her boyfriend, Harvey Dalton, a handsome but vapid heir to a banking fortune, and their friend, James Morrison, who seemed to exist only to laugh at their jokes. "I simply cannot believe they seated us this close to the kitchen," Linda was complaining, her voice a sharp, nasal whine that cut through the refined ambience. "The noise is positively proletarian. One would think my father, owning half the skyscrapers in this city, would merit a quieter table." Ella took a slow, centering breath. Just do the job. Observe, learn, endure. She approached the table, her professional smile feeling like a cheap mask. "Good evening. Welcome to the Onyx Room. My name is Ella, and I'll be your server tonight. May I begin with something from our wine list?" Harvey Dalton's eyes roamed over her, a slow, dismissive appraisal that made her skin crawl. He didn't reply to her question, turning instead to Linda. "See? The service is already slipping. They're letting just anyone wear the uniform now. Look at her shoes. Sensible." The trio chuckled, a sound devoid of genuine humor. It was the sound of bullies confirming their own superiority. Ella felt a hot flush creep up her neck, but she held her posture, her gaze fixed on a point just over Linda's perfectly coiffed blonde head. "Our special this evening is a pan-seared Chilean sea bass with a Maya lemon risotto," she recited, her voice a calm, even monotone. "We're not interested in your fish recital," Linda snapped, finally deigning to look at her. Her eyes were a cold, pale blue, and they held the casual cruelty of someone who had never been told no. She looked at Ella not as a human being, but as a malfunctioning appliance. "We want another bottle of the Sancerre, and be quick about it. My glass has been empty for nearly a minute." "Of course," Ella said, her smile tightening at the edges. "Right away." When she returned with the chilled bottle and a fresh set of glasses on her tray, the atmosphere at the table had soured further. Harvey was showing Linda a video on his phone, and they were laughing loudly. "Oh, that's just pathetic," Linda shrieked. "Look at that influencer trying to get a free meal. Some people have no shame." Ella moved with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and precise. She presented the bottle, uncorked it, and began to pour a small amount for Harvey to taste. As she leaned in, her arm extending over the table, Linda moved. It wasn't an accident. It was a fluid, deliberate act of malice, disguised as a casual gesture. As Linda reached for a bread roll, her elbow shot out, striking Ella's wrist with a sharp, painful jolt. The world seemed to slow down. The heavy green bottle slipped from Ella's grasp. The tray tilted. A full glass of crisp white wine arced through the air, a perfect, shimmering parabola of liquid, before it crashed against Ella's chest. The shock of the cold was instantaneous, a gasp-inducing slap that soaked through her white shirt and vest, plastering the fabric to her skin. The wine, smelling sharply of gooseberry and citrus, dripped down her front, pooling at the waistband of her skirt. The empty glass hit the marble floor and shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the suddenly silent restaurant. For a heartbeat, the entire dining room held its breath. Every eye was on the tableau, the dripping waitress, the shattered glass, the smirking socialite. Then Linda Carter laughed. It was not a giggle or a chuckle. It was a full-throated, theatrical cackle of pure, unadulterated amusement. "Oh my goodness!" she howled, clutching Harvey's arm for support. Would you look at that? I've never seen such clumsiness in my life. You've redecorated. Harvey joined in, slapping the table with his open palm. A new water feature for the restaurant. Bravo! Maybe you should stick to washing dishes, sweetheart. Ella stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. But it wasn't from fear or humiliation. It was from a rage so potent, so pure, it felt like a physical force inside her chest. She could buy this building with a single phone call. She could dismantle Daniel Carter's concrete empire before breakfast. But in this moment, in this uniform, she was powerless. You hit my arm, Ella said, her voice low and shaking with the effort of control. Linda's manufactured amusement vanished, replaced by a mask of theatrical outrage. Excuse me. How dare you? You clumsy little fool. You nearly ruined my dress with your incompetence, and now you're trying to blame me? Is that what they teach you in Waitress school? To assault the guests and then lie about it? I saw you, Ella insisted, her voice gaining strength. You moved your elbow. It was intentional. Manager, Harvey bellowed, snapping his fingers in the air with a percussive crack. Get the manager over here this instant. This employee is harassing us. Marcus Doyle materialized at the table in seconds, his face pale with panic. He took in the scene, the puddle on the floor, Ella's soaked uniform, the furious faces of his VIP guests, and his mind performed the cold, swift calculus of self-preservation. In his world, a customer with a 7-figure bank account was not just right, they were infallible. Miss Carter, Mr. Dalton, I am profoundly sorry. Doyle grovelled, his voice slick with sycophantic apology. He didn't even glance at Ella. This is completely unacceptable. A disgrace. It certainly is, Linda hissed, pulling out her phone. She angled it toward Ella, the camera lens a malevolent black eye. Say cheese, darling. I'm putting this on my story. The Onyx Room's pathetic service. Let's see how many reservations they have tomorrow after my followers see the kind of trash they're hiring. Ella instinctively turned her face away. Mr. Doyle, she did it on purpose. She assaulted me. Doyle's face contorted. He grabbed Ella's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep, and pulled her a few feet away from the table, his body shielding them from his precious guests. Shut your mouth, he whispered, his voice a venomous spray of spittle. Do you have any idea who that is? That's Linda Carter. Her father could buy this block and bulldoze it for fun. If she posts a bad review, we're finished. She threw wine on me for sport, Marcus, Ella said, her voice dangerously quiet as she dropped the formal title. And you're going to let her get away with it? What about your staff? My staff doesn't pay the bills, Doyle snarled. He straightened his tie and turned back to the table, his charming manager persona snapping back into place. Miss Carter, as a humble apology for this disturbance, your entire evening is, of course, on the house, including a bottle of our finest champagne to help you recover from the ordeal. Linda smirked, lowering her phone but keeping the camera aimed at the scene. A good start. And what about her? She pointed a perfectly manicured, blood-red nail at Ella. I don't want to see her pathetic face again. It's ruining the ambience. Doyle nodded eagerly. He pivoted back to Ella, his expression one of cold dismissal. You're done, Simmons. Clock out, you're fired. Ella's breath hitched. You're firing me? For being assaulted by a customer? I'm firing you for gross incompetence, destroying restaurant property, and harassing our distinguished guests, Doyle announced, his voice loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. Now get out of my sight before I have security remove you. Ella looked around the room. Diners were staring, their faces a mixture of pity, curiosity, and relief that the drama was not at their table. She looked back at table 7. Linda was whispering to Harvey, both of them grinning, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of their petty, cruel victory. A profound calm settled over Ella. The experiment was over. She had the data she needed. She reached into the pocket of her apron, pulled out her plastic name tag, and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a soft clatter in the puddle of spilled wine next to Linda's designer handbag. "You are making a terrible mistake, Marcus," Ella said. Her voice was different now. The deference was gone, replaced by the cool, crisp authority of a woman accustomed to being in charge. A very, very expensive mistake. "Get out!" Doyle shrieked, his composure finally cracking. Ella turned and walked toward the staff entrance, her back straight, her head held high. The cold, sticky fabric of her shirt was a minor annoyance. As she pushed through the swinging doors into the cacophony of the kitchen, she heard the triumphant pop of a champagne cork from table 7, followed by a fresh peal of Linda Carter's laughter. In the cramped, humid locker room, her hands were steady as she opened her small metal locker. She peeled off the ruined uniform, dropping it into a trash can. She didn't feel like crying. The humiliation had burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. She changed into the simple jeans and soft cashmere sweater she kept in her tote bag for the journey home. From the very back of her locker, tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, she retrieved her real phone. Not the cheap burner she used for work, but a sleek, encrypted device issued by Simmons Global Security. It lit up with 3 missed calls from Dad. She hesitated for only a second. This was no longer about her experiment. This was about a fundamental injustice that she now understood in her bones. This was for every server who had ever been humiliated, for every cook who had been screamed at, for every busboy who had been treated as less than human. She pressed the call button. He answered before the first ring was complete. "Ella, what's wrong? My security team just pinged me that you left mid-shift. I was about to storm the place." His voice was a deep baritone, usually warm and reassuring, but now edged with the sharp anxiety of a father who owned the world, but couldn't protect his daughter from a harsh word. "Dad," Ella said, and to her own surprise, her voice cracked just once. "I need you to come and get me." The line went silent for a moment. Then the warmth in his voice was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. It was the voice of Theodore Simmons, the corporate raider, the man who dismantled companies that displeased him. "Who hurt you?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Give me a name." "I'm in the alley behind the Onyx room," she said, ignoring his question for the moment. "And Dad, bring the Bentley, and tell Arthur to drive." Arthur was his head of security, a man who had been with him for 30 years. Bringing Arthur meant this wasn't a social call. This was business. "I'm 10 minutes away," he said. The line clicked dead. Ella stepped out into the cool night air of the service alley. The stench of garbage and stale grease filled her lungs. She leaned against the cold brick wall and waited. Inside, Linda Carter and her friends were toasting their victory, blissfully unaware that a force of nature was currently hurtling through the city streets, aimed directly at them. The bill for their dinner was about to come due, and it was going to be astronomical. Less than 10 minutes later, the narrow alley was flooded with a brilliant, white light that eclipsed the dingy security lamps. A long, impossibly sleek black Bentley Mulsanne purred to a silent stop just feet from where Ella stood. It was followed by a black Cadillac Escalade that blocked the alley's entrance. The Bentley's back door opened, and Theodore Simmons emerged. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with a shock of silver hair and a presence that seemed to warp the very air around him. He was wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit that likely cost more than the restaurant's monthly liquor budget. His eyes, the same intelligent hazel as his daughter's, scanned the alley before landing on her. He saw the dampness in her hair, the faint red mark on her wrist, and the resolute set of her jaw. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides, his expensive leather shoes silent on the grimy pavement. He didn't speak. He simply enveloped her in a hug, his arms a fortress of paternal protection. He smelled of sandalwood and power. He pulled back, his large hands framing her face, his thumbs gently brushing her cheeks. His gaze was intense, searching. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice a low rumble. And so she did. She told him about Linda's comments, Harvey's sneer, the deliberate shove, the spilled wine, the laughter, the public firing. With every word, she saw the muscles in her father's jaw tighten, his eyes growing colder and harder until they looked like chips of granite. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. He looked at the restaurant's back door as if he could incinerate it with his gaze alone. He straightened his suit jacket, a small, precise movement that signaled a shift from concerned father to ruthless executive. He looked over his shoulder at Arthur, a mountain of a man in an equally sharp suit who had emerged from the escalade. "Arthur," Theodore said, his voice calm but lethal. "Get our acquisitions team on the line. I want to know who owns this building, not the restaurant, the entire building. And I want to know Daniel Carter's current debt-to-equity ratio. I want to know every vulnerability in his over-leveraged construction portfolio. Wake up our legal team in London if you have to. I want it all. In the next 30 minutes. "Yes, Mr. Simmons," Arthur said, his fingers already dancing on a tablet. Theodore turned back to Ella. "Do you want to go home, sweetheart? We can handle this from there." Ella looked at the back door. She thought of Marcus Doyle's snarling face and Linda Carter's victorious laughter. She remembered the feeling of being utterly disposable. "No," she said, her spine stiffening. "I think I left something inside. I'd like to go get it." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Theodore Simmons's face. It was the smile that had terrified boardrooms for 3 decades. He offered her his arm. "Then by all means, my dear. Let's not keep them waiting." The grand entrance of the Onyx Room was a cathedral of modern wealth, all dark wood, gleaming brass, and hushed reverence. The hostess at the podium, a young woman who had pointedly ignored Ella's existence for weeks, was in the middle of telling a hopeful couple that the next available reservation was in 6 weeks. The heavy glass doors swung open, and Arthur entered first. He didn't need to say a word. His sheer size, tailored suit, and the almost invisible earpiece were enough to make the hostess's speech falter, and the waiting couple take a nervous step back. He simply stood to the side, holding the door. Then Theodore Simmons walked in, with Ella on his arm. The atmosphere in a room changes when a man with a net worth that rivals the GDP of a small country enters it. It wasn't just the suit or the confident, predatory grace of his movements. It was the immediate, rippling wave of recognition. Theodore Simmons was a legend, a titan of industry whose face was a regular feature on the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. A hush fell over the front of the restaurant. Diners paused with forks halfway to their mouths. Conversations died in a whisper. But the true shockwave hit a second later. The woman on his arm. She was wearing simple jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair still slightly damp and pulled back. But there was no mistaking her. It was the waitress. The clumsy, fired waitress. The hostess dropped her tablet. It hit the marble floor with a loud, unforgiving crack. Her face went ashen as she connected the impossible dots. Theodore didn't pause at the podium. He strode directly into the main dining room, his gaze sweeping the space like a hawk searching for its prey. Marcus Doyle was schmoozing a wealthy regular near the bar when he felt the sudden, unnatural silence. He looked up, annoyed. His eyes found Theodore Simmons, and for a glorious, fleeting moment, his heart soared. A visit from Simmons was the ultimate validation, a story he could dine out on for years. He started forward, a practiced, obsequious smile spreading across his face. "Mr. Simmons, what an unexpected and profound honor. Welcome to the Onyx." His words choked in his throat. He saw the woman on the billionaire's arm. His brain stuttered, refusing to process the image. It was Simmons, the waitress. His waitress, the one he had just thrown out like yesterday's trash. But she wasn't cowering anymore. She was looking directly at him, and her expression was one of cold, placid judgment. Theodore stopped a few feet from Doyle, forcing the manager to crane his neck to look up at him. "You must be Mr. Doyle," Theodore said. His voice was a pleasant, conversational baritone, yet it carried an unmistakable undertone of menace that echoed through the silent room. Yes, sir," Doyle stammered, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He flickered a terrified glance at Ella. I see you're acquainted with one of our former employees." "Acquainted?" Theodore repeated the word slowly, savoring it before letting out a short, mirthless laugh. He looked down at Ella, his expression softening for a fraction of a second, then snapped his gaze back to Doyle, the intensity making the manager physically flinch. "Mr. Doyle, this is not an employee. This is Ella Simmons, my daughter." From somewhere in the restaurant, there was the distinct sound of a fork clattering onto a plate. Daughter. The word detonated in the silent room. Marcus Doyle's face, already pale, drained of all remaining color. He looked like a ghost. He had fired the only daughter of Theodore Simmons. He had encouraged a guest to humiliate her. He had called her trash. I had no idea," Doyle whispered, his voice a hoarse croak. She never said—" "She shouldn't have to," Theodore cut in, his voice dropping to a dangerously low level. "My daughter was here to learn, to understand the value of hard work, a concept you are clearly unfamiliar with. And tonight, she received quite an education in your management style. An education that involved her being assaulted and then summarily fired for the crime of being the victim." He leaned in, his voice dropping further still for Doyle's ears alone. "I run a global hospitality empire, Mr. Doyle, and in my world, a manager who sides with a bully over his own staff isn't a manager. He's a liability, and I have a very specific way of dealing with liabilities." Theodore straightened up, his gaze sweeping past the terrified manager toward the prime booth by the window. "Are they still here?" Doyle could only manage a weak, pathetic nod. "Excellent," Theodore said. He squeezed Ella's arm gently. "Come, darling. I believe you have some unfinished business." At table 7, the celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by confused silence. Linda had watched the dramatic entrance, her mind struggling to comprehend the scene. Why was that pathetic waitress clinging to the arm of Theodore Simmons? "Who is that man?" she asked Harvey, annoyance coloring her tone. "And why is he making such a scene with the staff?" "That's Theodore Simmons," Harvey whispered back, his face suddenly tight with anxiety. "My father has been trying to get a meeting with him for a year. He's one of the most powerful men in the world." Before Linda could process this, the man himself was standing before them, casting a long shadow over their table. Ella was beside him, her expression unreadable. Linda, ever the opportunist, immediately shifted gears. She saw power and her instinct was to charm it. She sat up straighter, pushed her chest out, and flashed a dazzling, predatory— The smile Linda Carter offered was a masterpiece of social predation, honed over years of charity galas and VIP lounges. It was bright, dazzling, and utterly devoid of warmth, a weapon designed to disarm and assess. Her eyes, however, didn't smile. They flickered past Ella, dismissing her as a piece of furniture that had inexplicably followed them and locked onto the true source of power in the room. "Mr. Simmons," she purred, her voice a silken confection of privilege. She extended a hand, the diamonds on her wrist scattering light like shattered ice. What an unexpected pleasure. "I'm Linda Carter. My father, Daniel Carter of Carter Construction. He speaks of you with such reverence." Theodore Simmons regarded her outstretched hand as one might a curious and potentially venomous insect. He made no move to take it. His silence was not empty. It was a vast, cold vacuum, and Linda's carefully constructed poise began to falter within it. Her smile tightened, a fraction of uncertainty clouding her eyes. It was Ella who finally broke the spell. She took a single step forward, a small movement that shifted the entire gravitational center of the room. She was no longer attached to her father's arm. She stood on her own, a figure of quiet, unassailable authority. "Reverence, Miss Carter?" Ella's voice was low, yet it carried through the cavernous, silent dining room with crystalline clarity. It was the same voice that had recited the evening's specials, but the subservient monotone was gone, replaced by a cool, analytical cadence. "That's interesting, because in the circles my father and I move in, the word most often associated with Carter Construction is over-leveraged." Linda's hand dropped to her side. The color began to drain from her face, leaving behind a blotchy, confused pallor beneath her expensive foundation. Her gaze darted from Ella to Theodore, her mind refusing to connect the two impossible points. I don't understand. What is she doing with you?" "She is with me," Theodore stated, his voice a low rumble of thunder, "because I am her father." The two words landed with the force of a physical blow. Harvey Dalton made a choking sound, a piece of brioche falling from his slack jaw onto his lap. James Morrison, the sycophantic laugh track, seemed to shrink into his seat, trying to become invisible. But it was Linda who bore the full impact. Her world, built on a simple, brutal hierarchy, had just been inverted with the violence of a tectonic shift. The bug she had tried to crush was, in fact, the heir to the entire ecosystem. "Father," she whispered, the word a dry rasp. "You seem to have some difficulty with the concept of service tonight," Ella continued, her hazel eyes holding Linda's panicked gaze. She was no longer looking at a bully, but at a specimen. Her experiment had yielded its most fascinating data point. "So, allow me to clarify. Service is a profession. It is not an identity. The person who refills your water is not, by definition, less intelligent, less valuable, or less human than the person who signs the check. The uniform is not a costume for the insignificant. It is the attire of a professional performing a function." She gestured vaguely at the table, at the half-eaten food, the fine china, the crystal glasses. "Everything you have enjoyed tonight, the food, the wine, the ambiance, was made possible by a complex network of people you have deemed beneath your notice. The chef who trained for 15 years to perfect that sea base, the sommelier who can tell you the soil composition of a vineyard from a single sip, the dishwasher in the back, working in 100-degree heat so you can have a clean plate. You don't see them. You see only a reflection of your own status, and you found it lacking." Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. A pathetic whimper escaped her lips. I didn't know. It was a mistake. An accident. No, Ella said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal. It was not. An accident is a dropped tray. A mistake is forgetting an order. What you did was an act of recreational cruelty. You needed to feel powerful. So you chose the person in the room you believed had the least power to fight back. You didn't just spill wine on a waitress, Miss Carter. You used a human being as a prop to entertain your friends. You derived pleasure from humiliation. That isn't a mistake. It's a character flaw, and it's one your father is about to pay for. Theodore produced his phone, the movement economical and precise. He didn't dial. He simply tapped a single icon on his screen. A moment later, Arthur stepped forward, holding a tablet. On the screen was a live video feed of a man in a plush, wood-paneled office, looking startled. It was Daniel Carter. "Theodore," Carter said, his voice tinny through the tablet speaker. "What is this? Is everything all right?" "Daniel," Theodore's voice was devoid of all warmth. "I'm at the Onyx room. I'm here with my daughter." He angled the tablet slightly so Daniel could see the tableau. His own daughter, pale and trembling, and Ella, composed and resolute. "Ella?" Daniel's brow furrowed in confusion. Oh God. "Linda, what did you do?" The realization dawned on his face, a slow-motion cascade of horror. "Your daughter," Ella said, speaking directly to the man on the screen, "decided to physically assault me tonight. Then she and her friends used their social media platforms to publicly defame me and this establishment. Then she had me fired." "No," Daniel whispered, shaking his head. "Linda, no." "You see, Daniel," Theodore cut in, his voice like chips of ice. "Business, at its core, is about trust. It's about reputation. I trust that when I invest in a company, its leadership is sound. I trust that when I enter a partnership, the other party is reliable. The behavior of your heir has just shown me that the Carter name is fundamentally untrustworthy. It is associated with poor judgment, recklessness, and a shocking lack of character. How can I trust you to oversee a billion-dollar waterfront development when your own daughter cannot be trusted in a restaurant for a single evening?" "Theodore, please," Daniel begged, his face ashen. "She's a fool, a spoiled child. This has nothing to do with our business." "It has everything to do with it," Ella corrected him calmly. "It's about legacy. You're building a legacy, Mr. Carter. And right now, its future is sitting at this table, filming herself, laughing at a service worker. That's the Carter brand in 2024, and it's toxic." Theodore made a small gesture. Arthur tapped the screen, and another man's face appeared in a split-screen view. He was younger, with the sharp, hungry look of a Wall Street predator. "Mr. Simmons," the man said, "we're ready." "Daniel," Theodore said, "this is Michael Vance from our acquisitions division. He's been monitoring the outstanding debt on your last 3 commercial projects. The consortium of banks holding that debt has been looking for a majority partner to force a restructuring. Simmons Global became that partner 20 minutes ago. Michael, proceed with the call." "Wait!" Daniel Carter screamed through the speaker, his face contorted in panic. "Theodore, don't. We can talk about this." "The call is in, sir," Michael Vance said, his expression placid. "Your credit lines are frozen, effective immediately. All assets are subject to review. We'll be in touch with your CFO in the morning to discuss liquidation options." The video feed from Michael Vance's end cut out. Daniel Carter stared out from the screen, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with the sheer, world-ending terror of a man who had just lost everything. He looked at his daughter, and his expression was not one of anger, but of a profound, hollow despair. Then Arthur swiped the screen, and he was gone. A stunned, suffocating silence descended on the table. Linda was hyperventilating, her chest heaving in ragged, shallow breaths. Harvey looked as though he was about to be physically sick. You ruined him," Linda sobbed, tears carving clean tracks through her makeup. "You ruined my family." "No," Ella replied, her voice softening, but not with pity. It was the detached softness of a surgeon explaining a necessary amputation. "Your father ruined himself. He built an empire on a foundation of debt and ego, and he raised a daughter who reflected his worst qualities. This was just a market correction." She then turned her gaze to Marcus Doyle, who had been witnessing the entire exchange with the frozen horror of a man watching his own life burn to the ground. "Mr. Doyle," Ella said. The manager flinched as if struck. He shuffled forward, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. "Miss Simmons, I am so profoundly sorry. If I had known—" "That's the point, Marcus," Ella cut him off, her voice laced with a weary disappointment. "You shouldn't have to know. You shouldn't have to know who a person is to treat them with basic human dignity. Your job, your only real job, is to manage this space and the people in it. That includes your staff. You have a duty of care to them. When your customer became abusive, you didn't protect your employee. You protected the revenue stream. You threw a member of your team to the wolves to appease a bully. You failed. Not as a manager of the Onyx Room. You failed as a leader." Theodore's voice cut in, sharp and final. "Arthur, our real estate division closed on the controlling shares of Sterling Rayet about 10 minutes ago. We own this building now." He looked at Doyle, his eyes flat and merciless. "As the new owner, I am invoking the moral turpitude clause in the restaurant's lease. It is terminated. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. You are, of course, fired. Your personal assets will be reviewed to see what can be salvaged to pay your staff their severance." Doyle crumpled, not physically, but spiritually. The carefully constructed edifice of his professional life dissolved in an instant, leaving a terrified, broken man in its place. "And finally," Ella said, turning her attention back to the ruined trio at the table, "your bill." Harvey, finally finding his voice, sputtered, "The manager said it was on the house." "The manager is unemployed and the house is under new ownership," Theodore stated. Arthur stepped forward and placed a small, leather-bound billfold on the table. Harvey opened it with a trembling hand. His eyes widened. $250,000? He shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is insane! This is extortion!" "Not at all," Ella explained calmly. "The bill includes the cost of your meal and wine. It also includes a consulting fee. I have just provided you with a master class in brand management, crisis communication, and the long-term consequences of corporate culture. My usual fee for such a seminar is significantly higher. It also includes a mandatory, non-negotiable tip of $100,000, which will be distributed equally among every cook, server, busboy, and dishwasher who was working tonight. Think of it as a scholarship fund for their education in how the other half lives." She paused. "Pay it, or my father's legal team, who are far more expensive and far less pleasant than I am, will spend the next decade of your life dismantling your family's trust fund in court. Your choice." Harvey, pale and sweating, fumbled with his wallet and produced a black credit card, handing it to Arthur as if it were a bomb. Ella looked at Linda one last time. The girl was a wreck, sobbing into her hands. There was no victory in it, only a profound sense of waste. Ella reached into her pocket and pulled out the cheap, plastic name tag. Ella. She placed it gently on the table next to Linda's trembling hand. "I was going to offer you a job," Ella said softly. "A real one. Minimum wage, washing dishes in one of my father's hotels. I thought maybe, if you had to be invisible for a year, you might learn something. But I see now that would be pointless. You're already invisible, Linda. You're just a collection of brand names and your father's money. There's no one there. I don't want your apology. I just want you to sit here and think about the fact that your entire world ended tonight. Not because of a bad business deal, but because you couldn't resist the urge to be cruel to a stranger." With that, she turned. "I'm ready to go, Dad." As they walked away, the silence in the restaurant was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. They swept past the stunned hostess, through the grand doors held open by Arthur, and out into the cool, clean night air. The Bentley was a silent, leather-lined sanctuary. As it pulled away from the curb, leaving the glittering facade of the onyx room behind, Ella finally allowed herself to exhale. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a strange, hollow ache in her chest. She had won. The victory had been absolute, devastating and surgical, but it didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. "Are you all right?" Theodore asked, his voice gentle. He had taken off his suit jacket and loosened his tie. In the soft glow of the dashboard lights, he was just her father again. "I think so," she said, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window. "I just keep thinking about their faces. Doyle's, Linda's. That look of absolute ruin. They earned it, Ella. Every bit of it." "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That's what bothers me. I saw it happen. I orchestrated it. And a part of me enjoyed it. I felt the power, Dad. The ability to unmake someone with a word. And it felt good. And that scares me." Theodore was silent for a long moment, the city lights sliding across his thoughtful face. "That feeling doesn't make you cruel, Ella," he said finally. "It makes you human. The difference between you and them is what you choose to do with that power. They use it to hurt. You used it to deliver a consequence, to defend a principle." "My principle?" she asked, a bitter laugh escaping her. "My principle was to learn what it was like to be invisible. And what I learned is that it's awful. It's a slow, grinding erosion of your soul. Tonight I made them visible. I saw every one of their flaws, their weaknesses, their pathetic little fears, and I put them on display for the whole world. I did to them exactly what they did to me, just on a grander scale." "No," he corrected her gently. "They made you a target for their amusement. You made them accountable for their actions. There is a universe of difference between those two things." He reached across the seat and took her hand. His was large and warm. "What you did tonight, dismantling them piece by piece with their own arrogance, that wasn't my power, Ella. That was all you, your intelligence, your fire. I just provided the capital. I have never been more proud of you." His words were a balm. She squeezed his hand, a tear she hadn't realized was forming, finally tracing a hot path down her cheek. They drove the rest of the way in a comfortable, healing silence. The next morning, Ella did not go to the Simmons Global Tower. She went back to the Onyx Room. The doors were locked, a small, discreet sign announcing its permanent closure. She let herself in with a key Arthur had provided. The dining room was eerie in the daylight, stripped of its nighttime magic. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams slanting through the tall windows. It smelled of stale wine and regret. She walked through the silent tables to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Inside, she found Sophia, the sous chef, directing a small crew of cooks who were meticulously cleaning and packing up their stations. Sophia saw her and immediately stood straighter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Miss Simmons," she said, her voice respectful but not fearful. Her eyes were clear and direct. "Sophia," Ella said, offering a small smile. "Thank you for coming in." "This is our kitchen," Sophia said with a shrug. "We don't leave it a mess. I heard what happened. We all did. The tip, it's already in our bank accounts. For some of the guys, it's life-changing money. Thank you." "It's what you earned," Ella said. "I came here to talk about the future. This place, I'm going to gut it, rebuild it from the ground up. I have a vision for a new kind of restaurant, one where the staff is the main attraction, not the clientele, where dignity is our most important value. And I want you to help me build it, not as my chef, as my partner." Sophia's eyes widened. "Partner? I'm an ideas person. I understand systems. But you," Ella said, gesturing to the gleaming, spotless kitchen, "you understand this. The food, the people, the heart. I want to give you a stake in the business. Creative control, the resources to build the kitchen of your dreams, and a team that you lead. We'll call it something new. Something better." A slow, wondrous smile spread across Sophia's face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated hope. She looked around the kitchen, not at the shell of a failed restaurant, but at the foundation of a future she had never dared to imagine. "I have some ideas," Sophia said, the smile turning into a determined grin. Ella grinned back. She felt the last of the previous night's chill finally dissipate, replaced by a steady, growing warmth. She looked around the empty dining room, at the ghosts of Table 7, at the spot on the floor where the glass had shattered. It was no longer a scene of humiliation. It was a crucible, a place where she had been broken down and reforged. She had come here to understand a system, and she had ended up finding a mission. The experiment was over. The real work was about to begin.